Actor Timothy Busfield is back in a New Mexico courtroom for a detention hearing. He's accused of inappropriately touching two child actors on the set of The Cleaning Lady, which was filmed in that state.
There are moments in a person's life that strip away every carefully constructed layer of public persona, every rehearsed smile for the cameras, every polished interview answer, and leave behind only the raw, unfiltered truth of who they are. For Melissa Gilbert, the woman America watched grow up as Laura Ingalls Wilder on the beloved television series Little House on the Prairie, that moment arrived not on a stage or a soundstage, but inside a New Mexico courtroom in January 2026. At 61 years old, a woman who had spent the better part of 5 decades navigating the relentless scrutiny of fame, found herself doing something she had never quite done before in public. Laying her heart completely bare, not for an audience, not for ratings, but for a judge who held her husband's fate in his hands. This is a story about love tested by fire. It is a story about loyalty that doesn't waver even when the headlines are devastating and the public conversation turns brutal. But it is also a story deeply rooted in decades of two lives built in the entertainment industry, two careers carved out through talent and determination, and two people who found each other when neither was particularly looking. To understand why Melissa Gilbert's courtroom plea carried such extraordinary weight, you have to go back to the beginning, not just of their marriage, but of who each of them truly is. Melissa Gilbert was born on May 8, 1964, in Los Angeles, California, into a world already shaped by the entertainment industry. Adopted as an infant, she was raised in a family connected to Hollywood, and from an early age, it became clear that she possessed a natural gift for performance. What no one could have predicted was just how completely one role would come to define her in the public imagination. When she was cast as Laura Ingalls Wilder in Little House on the Prairie, she beat out more than 500 other young actresses for the part. She was still a child, yet she carried the weight of that character with a grace and authenticity that resonated with millions of viewers across America and around the world. Little House on the Prairie ran from 1974 through 1983, and during those years, Melissa Gilbert grew up in front of the entire country. Audiences watched her transform from a scrappy, bright-eyed little girl into a young woman, and in doing so, they felt as though they knew her. The bond between the audience and Laura Ingalls, and by extension between the audience and Melissa Gilbert herself, became something rare and enduring. Even decades after the show ended, people who grew up watching it would approach her with a warmth that went beyond ordinary celebrity admiration. She was part of their childhood. She was woven into their memories of simpler, quieter times. But life after a role that defining is never entirely simple. Melissa Gilbert spent her adult years working diligently to establish herself beyond that single iconic character. She took on roles in television movies, appeared in theater productions, and wrote a candid memoir that pulled back the curtain on her life in ways that surprised and moved her fans. She served as president of the Screen Actors Guild from 2001 to 2005, demonstrating that her ambitions and abilities extended well beyond performing. She married twice before meeting Timothy Busfield, first to actor Bo Brinkman in 1988, a marriage that lasted 4 years, and then to actor Bruce Boxleitner in 1995, with whom she had 2 sons and shared 16 years of marriage before they divorced in 2011. By the time she entered her late 40s, Melissa Gilbert had experienced more chapters of life than most people twice her age. She understood loss and reinvention. She understood the particular loneliness of being famous in a way that makes genuine human connection harder rather than easier. And she had learned, through the trials and joys of motherhood, that love in its truest form is not glamorous. It is steadfast, sometimes exhausting, deeply private, and worth protecting at all costs. Timothy Busfield came from a different corner of the same world. Born in Lansing, Michigan, in 1957, he arrived at acting through theater, developing his craft with the kind of serious dedication that would eventually translate into one of the most respected careers in American television drama. He appeared on Broadway early in his career, understudying Matthew Broderick in Brighton Beach Memoirs in 1982, and made his mark on film audiences with his role in Revenge of the Nerds in 1984. But it was television where Busfield truly found his home and his voice. His role as Elliot Weston on 30-something, the critically acclaimed ABC drama that ran from 1987 to 1991, earned him an Emmy Award in 1991 and cemented his reputation as a performer of genuine depth and emotional intelligence. The show itself was a landmark piece of television storytelling, exploring the complexities of adult life, marriage, friendship, and professional ambition in ways that felt honest and human rather than sensationalized. Busfield was a central part of what made that show work. He brought a warmth and relatability to his character that made audiences feel as though Elliot was someone they actually knew, someone who could have been their neighbor or their college friend. As his acting career continued with roles in films including Field of Dreams and ongoing television appearances, Busfield also began transitioning increasingly into directing and producing. He co-founded the B Street Theater in Sacramento, California, alongside his brother, establishing a commitment to live performance and emerging talent that spoke to something deeper in his artistic identity than mere career advancement. He wanted to build things that lasted. He wanted to mentor, to teach, to create spaces where stories could be told with integrity. His personal life had seen its own complexities. His first marriage, to Radha Delamarter in 1984, ended in 1994. A second marriage to Jennifer Merwin in 1996 also eventually came to an end. By the time he entered his 50s, Busfield was a man who had known both professional triumph and personal upheaval, and who had emerged from those experiences with a perspective shaped by hard-won wisdom. The entertainment industry is a small world in the way that all worlds built around a shared passion tend to be small. Events, premieres, collaborative projects, and industry gatherings create a constant circulation of familiar faces. And over the years, Timothy Busfield and Melissa Gilbert had moved through many of the same circles. But it was not until around 2012 that their connection moved beyond collegial familiarity into something much more personal and significant. Both were at transitional moments in their lives. Gilbert had recently navigated the end of her second marriage and was raising her sons while continuing to work. Busfield was focused on his directing career and the ongoing work of B Street Theater. The timing, as it often is with these things, was not exactly planned. Their friendship deepened organically, fueled by mutual respect, shared creative values, and a compatibility that became increasingly difficult to ignore. By 2013, their relationship had become public knowledge, and on April 24th of that year, they married at San Isidro Ranch in Santa Barbara, California, a venue whose historical beauty and understated elegance suited a couple who had both long since outgrown any need for ostentatious display. The wedding was described by those who attended as intimate and joyful, a gathering of people who genuinely loved and admired the two of them, witnessing the beginning of a chapter that felt to everyone present like something that simply made sense. In the years that followed, their lives became genuinely intertwined in ways that went beyond the domestic. They worked together creatively, producing the film Guest Artist and establishing Grand River Productions, their independent production company dedicated to nurturing original stories and supporting emerging talent. They made homes together in Michigan and later in New York, building a life that balanced the demands of their continuing careers with the quieter rhythms of family, community, and creative collaboration. Those who spent time around them in these years described a relationship characterized by genuine partnership, mutual support, and a shared sense of humor that kept even difficult moments manageable. Publicly, they presented a picture of two accomplished, grounded people who had found in each other something they had perhaps not fully expected. A partner who understood the particular texture of a life lived in the public eye, who did not need explaining, and who chose presence and loyalty over the easier paths available to people of their professional standing. For the fans who had followed Melissa Gilbert since her Little House days, there was something genuinely moving about watching her settled and happy in this phase of her life. And for those who had admired Timothy Busfield's work over the decades, his evident contentment seemed to give his already substantial career an additional dimension of personal richness. Then, in late 2024, everything changed. In November of that year, a physician at the University of New Mexico Hospital contacted law enforcement authorities in Albuquerque. The doctor's report was connected to concerns brought by the parents of two young twin boys who had worked as child actors on The Cleaning Lady, a Fox television crime drama that filmed primarily in Albuquerque. Timothy Busfield had joined the production in 2022 as a director and executive producer, working on the show through multiple seasons as it filmed in the distinctive landscape of New Mexico's high desert surroundings. The parents told police that they believed their sons, who were 7 and 8 years old during the period in question, had experienced something deeply troubling while on that set. The boys, whose identities were protected in court filings through the use of initials only, reportedly told investigators that certain interactions with Busfield had made them profoundly uncomfortable. In January 2026, after the investigation had progressed through the careful, deliberate processes that serious criminal allegations require, a judge signed an arrest warrant for Timothy Busfield. The charges included criminal sexual contact with a minor and 1 count of child abuse under New Mexico law. The weight of those words, placed against the backdrop of a career and a life built over nearly 50 years in the entertainment industry, was staggering. For anyone who had followed Busfield's work, for anyone who knew him personally or professionally, the news landed with a particular disorienting force that serious allegations against someone who seemed, by all visible evidence, to be a person of integrity always carries. It demanded a reckoning with the limits of what we can know about anyone, no matter how well we believe we know them. Busfield did not run. He did not disappear into legal strategy and silence. He turned himself in to the Metro Detention Center in Albuquerque on January 13, 2026, after being notified about the warrant. Before entering custody, he spoke briefly to reporters outside his attorney's office, stating clearly and directly that he had not done anything to those children, that he intended to confront what he characterized as lies, and that he would drive the roughly 2,000 miles from California to New Mexico to face the process head-on. The image of a man in an orange jumpsuit at the detention center, a man whose face had been familiar and respected for decades, circulated through news outlets and social media with the viral speed that defines modern media moments of this kind. His first court appearance on January 14 set the stage for what would become one of the most intensely covered celebrity legal cases in recent memory. Prosecutors sought to hold him without bail, arguing that the nature and seriousness of the allegations warranted it. The judge initially agreed, ordering Busfield held in custody while the legal process moved forward. From the earliest moments of the legal proceedings, Busfield's defense team moved aggressively and strategically. They did not simply deny the charges and wait. They constructed a counter-narrative that attacked the credibility of the accusation at its foundation, beginning with the background and history of the boys' parents. Defense attorneys pointed to public records showing that Ronald Rodis, the father of the twin boys, was a former attorney who had been convicted of federal conspiracy and wire fraud charges stemming from a fraudulent mortgage modification scheme that targeted vulnerable homeowners during the housing crisis. According to Department of Justice records, he had pleaded guilty in June 2016, received a prison sentence of 41 months, and been ordered to pay nearly $4 million in restitution to the clients his scheme had defrauded. He had subsequently been disbarred. Defense attorneys argued that this documented history of dishonesty and financial fraud was directly relevant to evaluating the credibility of the family's claims against their client. They also pointed to a reported independent investigation conducted by Warner Brothers Television, the studio behind The Cleaning Lady, which they said had found no evidence corroborating the allegations. Busfield additionally submitted to a polygraph examination, the results of which his attorneys described as supporting his account of events, though they acknowledged that polygraph results carry uncertain admissibility in court proceedings. Perhaps most pointedly, the defense argued that the allegations had emerged only after the twin boys were no longer employed on the show, and only after the family had consulted with civil legal counsel, raising what they characterized as serious questions about whether financial motivation rather than genuine child welfare concern was driving the complaint. Defense attorney Amber Feyerberg put the argument in stark terms, asserting that while the children themselves might deserve sympathy, they had not been victimized by Timothy Busfield but rather by parents whose documented history of dishonesty and financial misconduct had led them to manufacture a false accusation. Prosecutors countered these arguments by emphasizing that the backgrounds of the accuser's parents did not diminish or invalidate the evidence gathered independently, including medical assessments and therapeutic accounts that, in their view, supported the children's disclosures. The legal battle was fully joined, and it was clear from the earliest stages that neither side intended to yield ground easily. Into this storm stepped Melissa Gilbert. On January 16, 2026, just 2 days after her husband's first court appearance, Gilbert submitted a personal letter to the judge overseeing the case. It was not a legal document in any conventional sense. It contained no citations, no procedural arguments, no formal claims. It was something far more elemental, the words of a woman speaking plainly about the man she had chosen to build her life with, asking for mercy and understanding from a court that operated by rules of evidence and procedure rather than by the language of love and loyalty. In the letter, Gilbert described her husband as her love, her rock, and her partner in every dimension of their shared life. She spoke of his character with the specificity that only genuine intimacy provides, describing not abstract virtues but the lived texture of who he was as a husband, a stepfather, a collaborator, a friend. She spoke of his humor and warmth. She spoke of the particular way he showed up for the people around him, consistently and without fanfare. She used the word heart repeatedly, in the sense of someone whose presence at the center of a family and a community gives that community its sustaining energy. Most striking of all was the line in which she acknowledged her own powerlessness in this moment. She wrote that he had always been her protector, and that she was trying now to be his, but found that she could not protect him in the way she desperately wanted to. The admission carried an emotional honesty that was difficult to read without feeling its full weight. This was not a woman performing grief for the cameras. This was a woman who had spent a lifetime in the public eye and had learned, through long experience, exactly how to mean what she said. Gilbert's letter was one of more than 75 character letters submitted to the court on Busfield's behalf. They came from an extraordinary range of voices, former 30-something castmates including Polly Draper, Peter Horton, Mel Harris, Ken Olin, Patricia Wettig, and Melanie Mayron, theater colleagues and collaborators, neighbors and childhood acquaintances, and family members whose perspectives carried particular intimacy. Each letter added a brushstroke to a portrait of a man whose character, as seen by those who knew him across decades and in widely varying circumstances, did not match the image the charges implied. Among the most personally striking contributions was a letter from Gilbert's eldest son, Michael Boxleitner, who described Busfield as his hero and spoke with evident feeling about the role the man had played in his life as a stepfather. The letter was a reminder that the stakes in this case extended far beyond two famous people in a legal crisis. An entire family had been built around this relationship, and every person in that family was now living through a moment of profound uncertainty. On January 20, 2026, the pre-trial detention hearing took place in Bernalillo County. The courtroom was dense with the competing pressures of a high-profile case. Prosecutors arguing for continued detention, defense attorneys presenting their character evidence and counter-arguments, and in the gallery, Melissa Gilbert sitting quietly, her presence itself a kind of statement. The judge's ruling, when it came, provided a measure of relief to those in Busfield's corner. Finding that the prosecution had not sufficiently demonstrated that no combination of release conditions could adequately protect public safety, the judge ordered Busfield released from custody under strict conditions. He was required to remain under the supervision of pre-trial services in Albuquerque, prohibited from possessing firearms or dangerous weapons, required to abstain from alcohol and controlled substances, and forbidden from any contact with the alleged victims or their families. When the ruling was announced, Gilbert's emotional response was visible to everyone in the courtroom. Reports from those present described tears, quiet expressions of overwhelming relief, and moments of physical tenderness with supporters who had gathered around her. For a woman who had carried herself through weeks of devastating public scrutiny with remarkable composure, the release of that tension in the courtroom spoke to the depth of what she had been privately enduring. But release from jail is not exoneration, and everyone in that courtroom understood that. The legal road ahead remained long and uncertain. A status conference was scheduled for February 4, 2026. A preliminary hearing to determine whether sufficient probable cause existed to proceed to trial would follow. If the case moved forward to a jury trial, the potential consequences under New Mexico law were severe, including significant prison time if conviction were ever secured. The Busfield case has generated the kind of intense public conversation that serious allegations against well-known figures always produce, particularly in an era when the entertainment industry's relationship with power, accountability, and the protection of vulnerable people has been under sustained scrutiny. It has drawn commentary from legal analysts, entertainment journalists, child welfare advocates, and ordinary people whose feelings about the case have ranged from shock and disbelief to anger and deep concern for the children at the center of it all. But Melissa Gilbert's particular role in this story has added a dimension that pure legal analysis cannot fully capture. She is not just a wife standing by her husband. She is a woman with her own complicated history with public life and private pain, a woman who knows what it means to have your identity defined by others' perceptions and to work over many years to reclaim it on your own terms. She is also a woman who was herself a child in the entertainment industry, who understands from personal experience the vulnerability of young people working in that world and the weight of responsibility that adults in positions of authority carry toward them. That context does not resolve the legal questions at the heart of this case. It does not determine guilt or innocence. Courts exist precisely because human judgment, even the judgment of people who love someone deeply and genuinely, is not sufficient on its own to establish truth in the complex situations where allegations of serious harm are made. The legal process that lies ahead for Timothy Busfield will involve evidence, testimony, procedural rules, and the deliberate weighing of competing claims by trained professionals whose job is to get as close to the truth as human institutions allow. What Melissa Gilbert's courtroom letter does is remind us that behind every legal case involving a public figure, there are private human beings whose lives have been fundamentally altered by the chain of events that produced the headlines. There is a wife who is also trying to be a protector when the protective role has been taken from her. There are stepchildren navigating a family crisis they did not choose. There are colleagues and friends holding fast to a version of a person that they have known over decades, unsure of what to believe and how to reconcile contradictory truths. As of this writing, the case against Timothy Busfield continues to move through the legal system. The preliminary hearing will be a critical juncture, determining whether prosecutors have established sufficient probable cause for the matter to proceed to trial. Both sides have signaled clearly that they intend to fight vigorously for their positions, and the legal arguments ahead will be substantial and complex. For Melissa Gilbert, the months ahead represent a continuation of an ordeal that has already tested her in ways she could not have anticipated when she wrote her letter to the court in January. She has made her loyalty and her faith in her husband's character as public as they can possibly be. She has stood beside him in courtrooms and outside them, has been photographed through her most emotional moments by cameras that do not look away, and has conducted herself throughout with a quiet dignity that has drawn admiration even from people who feel profoundly uncertain about the situation itself. She is 61 years old, a grandmother, a working artist, a woman with a lifetime of experience navigating the particular demands that come with having lived so much of your life in the public eye. She has known triumph and loss and reinvention. She has raised children and built businesses and written honestly about her own struggles. And now she is living through something that none of her previous experiences could have fully prepared her for. The test of whether the love and loyalty she has built her life's second chapter around will survive the full weight of what the legal system, the media, and the court of public opinion can bring to bear. The outcome of Timothy Busfield's case will be determined by courts and evidence and the slow, deliberate grinding of legal procedure. But the story of Melissa Gilbert's place in it, the 61-year-old woman who broke her silence not to a journalist or a television audience but to a judge, in a room full of legal machinery, with nothing but the plain truth of her own heart, is a story that will endure regardless of how the legal